Erev Tov Rabotai, we are continuing with our Mishna Yomi Masechet Eduyot. We are up to Perek Gimel, Mishna Yud. Today's Mishnayot should be Le'ilui Nishmat, Neria ben Svetlana, Ranbai, Eliyahu ben Burchai Israelov, Chana ben Miriam, Sason ben Ryan, Yoshua ben Shifra, Menuchatam began Eden, Amen. And להבדיל בין חיים לחיים ולרפואה שלמה ודניאל נשלום בן רוזה בתוך שאר חולי ישראל ולהחלמה מהרה בנימין אור ציון חי בן דבורה. The Mishnah lists 3 rulings of Rabban Gamliel that apply to Yom Tov. These rulings were matter of dispute between Bet Shammai and Bet Hillel, and in each one Rabban Gamliel sided with Bet Shammai. The Mishnah also appears in Betzah, chapter 2, Mishnah 6. Shelosha dvarim Rabban Gamliel machmir k'divrei Bet Shammai. In 3 matters regarding Yom Tov, Rabban Gamliel rules strictly following the view of Bet Shammai. Although Rabban Gamliel descended from Hillel, he followed the opinion of Shammai and Bet Shammai in these 3 rulings. En tomnin et hachamim Yom Tov l'Shabbat. We may not insulate a pot of hot water on Yom Tov for use on Shabbat, even if an eruv tafshilin has been made. When Yom Tov falls on Friday, biblical law allows cooking on Yom Tov, not only for that Yom Tov, but also for Shabbat, which is the next day. This is in Pesachim, page 46b. The rabbis, however, prohibited cooking on Yom Tov for Shabbat in order to keep people from cooking on Yom Tov for a weekday. Nevertheless, the rabbis also ruled that if a person cooked a dish before Yom Tov for Shabbat, he is allowed to continue doing so even on Yom Tov. This rabbinic arrangement, which permits cooking on Yom Tov for the Shabbat, is known as eruv tavshilin. But here, the Mishnah says we may not insulate a pot of hot water on Yom Tov for use on Shabbat, even if an eruv tavshilin has been made, because a standard eruv tavshilin is not effective to permit insulating on Yom Tov for Shabbat. The rabbis prohibit insulating a pot of hot water or hot food on Shabbat, for example, by wrapping it in wool, as it says in Masechet Shabbat, chapter 2, Mishnah 7. Insulating, which the Mishnah calls hatmana, literally hiding, is also forbidden on Yom Tov unless the water will be used on Yom Tov. If Yom Tov falls on a Friday, one may not insulate food on Yom Tov for Shabbat, just as other acts of food preparation are rabbinically prohibited on Yom Tov for Shabbat. Bet Shammai take the step further. They forbid insulating food on Yom Tov for the Shabbat, even if an eruv tavshilin has been made. In their view, an eruv tavshilin allows only the acts of food preparation that were done to make the eruv itself. For example, if someone cooked food for the eruv, he may only cook food on Yom Tov for the Shabbat, but not bake bread and the like. And if someone baked bread for the eruv, he may only bake on Yom Tov for the Shabbat, but not cook. Therefore, if someone made a standard eruv by cooking a food, but did not insulate any food, Bet Shammai prohibit him to insulate hot food or water on Yom Tov for Shabbat. Someone who wants to insulate food on Yom Tov for Shabbat must insulate some food for the eruv. Bet Hillel, on the other hand, ruled that even if someone only cooked for the eruv, he may do any act of food preparation on Yom Tov for the Shabbat, including insulating. Next case of the Mishnah, Ven zokfin et menorah b'Yom Tov, and we may not reassemble the parts of a candlestick on Yom Tov, because this resembles the melacha of building, which is prohibited on Yom Tov. Building is one of the melachot that are forbidden on Shabbat and Yom Tov. Bet Shammai hold that the prohibition applies not only to actual buildings, like structures attached to the ground, but also to objects that are not attached to the ground. Therefore, they forbid putting a candlestick back together on Shabbat and Yom Tov. However, even according to Bet Shammai, this is forbidden only because it resembles building. It is not real building, because such candlesticks were made to be taken apart and reassembled. Bet Hillel, however, hold that the melacha of building does not apply to objects. Therefore, in their opinion, one may reassemble a candlestick on Yom Tov, provided that the parts can be attached without force. The next case, Ven ofin pitin giritzin ela rekikin, and we may not bake thick loaves, many loaves. A large number of loaves was called thick because they were needed as one large thick dough. So we may not bake many loaves of bread on Yom Tov if these are more than are needed for the Yom Tov, because it is forbidden on Yom Tov to expend more effort than necessary. Rather, we may bake only thin loaves, the few loaves actually needed. According to Bet Hillel, though, we may bake many loaves at one time, even if more bread than necessary will be produced. Their reason is that putting many loaves in the oven leaves less empty space, which makes the heat more concentrated, causing the necessary loaves to be baked better. Now, Rabban Gamliel cites support for the last ruling. Amar Rabban Gamliel said, ממהן של בית אבא לא היו אופין פיתין גיריצין אלא רקיקין. In all the days of my father's household, the father of this Rabban Gamliel was Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel the first, the great grandson of Hillel. So he says, in all the days of my father's household, they would not bake thick loaves, many loaves of bread in Yom Tov, only thin loaves, a few loaves, avoiding extra effort. Now the support is rejected by the sages. Amrulo, they said to him, Uma na'aseh lebet avicha. What shall we do with this practice of your father's household? It does not prove that baking thick loaves is generally prohibited, because they were stringent in this matter for themselves. But they ruled leniently for all the other people of Israel and allowed them to bake thick, numerous loaves of bread, and even to make coal-baked bread, which requires even greater effort. Coal-baked loaves were large doughs baked directly on coals. Baking these loaves requires great effort because the coals have to be stoked constantly to prevent them from cooling off. Despite the extra effort involved, Rabban Gamliel's father permitted others to bake such bread in Yom Tov. Although the members of his own household refrained from doing so, that does not indicate the halacha, because in this matter they committed themselves to go beyond the requirements of the law. And the Rav tells us the halacha does not follow Rabban Gamliel and all of his stringencies that he took like Bet Shammai. And that is in a Mishnah Yud. Mishnah Yud Aleph, which also appears in Betzat chapter 2, Mishnah 7, lists 3 lenient rulings of Rabban Gamliel that were disputed by the sages. In addition, he ruled more leniently than the sages in these 3 matters. Mechabdin ben amitot, we may sweep food from between the couches on which people recline when eating. In Talmudic times, people often recline on couches when they ate, because there is little concern that in such a small area, one might fill in small holes and thereby level the floor of the Melachav building. And we may place incense on burning coals on Yom Tov to create a pleasant aroma, despite this being a Melachav kindling, because it increases one's joy on Yom Tov. One of the Melachot forbidden on Shabbat is lighting a flame. Placing incense on coals is prohibited under this Melacha because one thereby makes the incense burn. Generally, whatever melachot are forbidden on Shabbat are also forbidden on Yom Tov, except for certain melachot that are needed for the preparation of food. However, burning incense is permitted even though it is not food related, because the rule is that once a melacha is permitted for food preparation, it is permitted for any other Yom Tov need as well. Again, this is all Rabban Gamliel. The osim gedi mikulas belele psachim, and we may roast a young goat together with its innards on Pesach nights, because that is how the Pesach offering was roasted, and one thereby commemorates the offering. The Torah requires the Pesach offering to be roasted on a spit with its knees and innards at its sides. This is in Shemot chapter 12, verse 9. Rabban Gamliel permitted people in his time, after the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash, to roast a young goat, one of the animals eligible for the Pesach offering, in this manner, and eat it at the Seder meal, so that the offering would be remembered. Rabban Gamliel disagrees with the sages who forbid this practice, because one who eats a goat roasted this way at the Seder meal appears to be violating the prohibition of eating a sacred offering outside Jerusalem. The sages disagree with Rabban Gamliel, but the sages prohibit these 3 acts. They forbid sweeping between couches, because that might lead to filling in holes in the floor elsewhere in the house. They prohibit placing incense on burning coals, because this is not the practice of most people, and therefore is not considered a Yom Tov need. The Torah states in the book of Shemot, chapter 12, verse 6, that which is eaten or otherwise enjoyed by all people, that alone may be done for you. By adding all people, the verse teaches that melacha is permitted on Yom Tov only for a need that is common to all or most people. Davar sheveh lechol nefesh. Therefore, burning spices to create a pleasant aroma is not permitted on Yom Tov, because this was done only by a few people, namely those who were especially particular about the aroma in a room, or those with strong body odor. They forbid also roasting a young goat with its innards on Pesach nights, because this was a specific requirement of the Pesach offering, and doing so might cause people to think that one is eating a Pesach offering outside of Jerusalem, which is forbidden. And the Rav tells the halacha follows the opinion of the Chachamim. And that is in about today's Mishna Yomi. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen v'amen.